Black executive had wine poured over her by Billionaire's sister. Then she shut down their 2.4B contract. The chandeliers burned bright above a Chicago ballroom that pulsed with quiet wealth. Marble floors, golden accents, and laughter, polished thin. Amara Kingston, a black executive celebrated for signing a 2.4B deal that morning, carried herself with calm certainty, every gesture measured. Then came Elise Warwick. The billionaire's sister, draped in silk, stepped forward, like she owned every eye in the room. Her smile widened, her glass tilted, and a stream of deep red wine cut the air like blood in water. It splashed across Amara's navy dress, soaking through fabric, sliding cold against her skin. Gasps rippled. A man laughed nervously. Phones rose higher, screens glowing, capturing humiliation like it was entertainment. Elise didn't flinch. She leaned close enough for her perfume to sting and whispered something that made the closest guests stifle their shock. The orchestra kept playing, violins chasing a melody no one heard anymore. Amara didn't shout. She didn't step back. She stood utterly still, her silence louder than the music, her eyes unblinking under the chandelier's glow. Drops of red ran down her arm and hit the marble like seconds on a clock. People waited for her to crack, to fight back, to plead. Instead, her hand brushed the stem of her untouched glass, steady as stone. In that frozen moment, Elise's smirk trembled almost, imperceptibly. Everyone felt it, the shift no one could explain. A woman humiliated, yet not broken. A billion-dollar contract hangs over the night like invisible lightning. And then, Amara moved. Not with rage, not with fear, but with something so deliberate, so devastating, that the entire hall would replay it in whispers for years. What she did next would silence even the cruelest laugh. The celebration was meant to symbolize unity, power, and the smooth merging of two empires. But beneath the surface, the air carried tension sharper than glass. The Chicago banquet hall chosen for the evening gleamed with every ounce of luxury its hosts could summon. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like crowns made of fire, scattering golden light across marble floors polished so perfectly that reflections shimmered with each movement. Velvet curtains lined the walls, their deep crimson folds absorbing the echoes of conversation, while silver trays floated across the room in the hands of waiters moving with choreographed precision. Music from a live quartet threaded through. The noise, elegant yet subdued, as if even the violins knew they were competing with deals worth billions. The gala was arranged to honor the monumental 2.4B contract signed earlier that morning between Kingston Dynamics, Amara Kingston's firm, and Warwick Global, owned by the family of Elise Warwick. It was a union projected to shift industries, move markets, and command headlines. To the guests circling the room with champagne flutes and polite laughter, it was a night of promise, power consolidated into a single sparkling evening. Yet promise can sour quickly when arrogance takes the stage. Amara had entered the hall with dignity carved into her frame. Her navy dress, tailored and understated, spoke of quiet confidence, not the gaudy hunger for attention that shimmered on so many sequined gowns around her. Every nod she gave to partners, every handshake she accepted, carried the authority of a woman who had built her place rather than inherited it. She had signed the papers that morning with the steadiness of someone who knew her worth. Still, to many in the room, she remained an outsider, a black executive commanding a deal that would ripple through Wall Street and beyond. Elise Warwick noticed. Elise had always been noticed, though rarely for the right reasons. Draped in silver, silk that clung like a second skin, she entered with the kind of exaggerated poise only money can purchase. Her reputation trailed her. Whispers of cruelty disguised as wit, arrogance mistaken for charm, and the assumption that her surname was enough to shield her from consequence. The gala, however, was not supposed to be her stage. It was meant to be Amara's victory. That fact alone pricked Elise like a thorn under velvet. The hall shifted subtly when the two women crossed paths. Conversations softened, phones tilted higher, and the clink of glassware echoed against the marble as if even objects anticipated a scene. Elise's eyes narrowed, her smile curling at the edges, a predator cloaked in glamour. She lifted her glass. Red wine that caught the chandelier's glow, appearing almost violent in its beauty. With a flick of her wrist that looked casual yet carried intent, she poured. Liquid cascaded downward, striking Amara's navy dress, with a sound muffled by fabric, yet loud enough to cut through the chatter. Gasps scattered across the room like startled birds. Wine spread in dark streams across silk, staining it in patterns too cruel to ignore. Amara did not flinch. She stood, rooted, her gaze steady, her posture unbroken. The chilled liquid clung to her skin, slipping along seams, dripping steadily to the marble below, each drop hitting with the precision of a clock ticking toward a shift no one could yet predict. Elise leaned closer, lips parted in a smile designed to wound. Her voice slid into Amara's ear, pitched for intimacy, but carried loudly enough that nearby guests could savor the cruelty. Don't forget where you stand. Contracts may buy entry, but not belonging. A few chuckles slipped from the crowd. One guest, emboldened by alcohol, let out a short laugh that cracked into silence. Another lifted a phone, screen glowing, as it captured humiliation under crystal light. In corners of the room, whispers unfurled. Some voices carried sympathy, others delight. The cruelty was entertainment for those who believed they'd never be its target. Amara's silence unsettled them more than outrage could have. She reached for no napkin, spoke no word, gave no visible sign of distress. Instead, she allowed the wine to mark her, allowed the room to feel the weight of its own complicity. The stain became more than fabric. It was a mirror reflecting arrogance back to those who fed it. Elise expected protest, perhaps a raised voice or tears. She expected the spectacle to complete itself with Amara's composure fractured, yet what she received was something far sharper. Amara's eyes met hers, unwavering, not heated but unyielding, and in that calm, Elise's confidence trembled, though only slightly. "You're too quiet," Elise announced suddenly, louder now, turning her cruelty into performance. "What's the matter? Can't find your voice without contracts and signatures?" The laughter returned, hesitant yet eager, as if guests feared missing their cue. Glasses lifted again, and conversations twisted to feed the fire. One young man recorded without shame, whispering to his companion, "This will trend before dessert." The orchestra played on, but the melody had soured. Strings strained against the air heavy with judgment. Amara stood still, shoulders squared, her silence pressing heavier than any reply could. Wine dripped slowly down her wrist, staining her, hand like ink. Elise, emboldened by the crowd's chuckles, circled her like a cat prolonging cruelty. "They'll write about this tomorrow," she taunted, her tone honeyed yet venomous. "Not about your signature, but about your stain." A murmur rippled across the hall, half amusement, half unease. Not everyone found the spectacle entertaining. Some shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the two women, wondering how far Elise would go, how long Amara would allow herself to remain a canvas for arrogance. Yet even in discomfort, phones remained lifted, lenses hungry for a clip that would travel beyond these marble walls. Amara finally moved, not with anger but with measured grace. She placed her untouched glass of water gently onto a passing tray, freeing her hands, and then let them fall loosely by her side. Her breathing remained steady, her gaze locked forward. No protest, no retreat, only presence. That presence unsettled more than Elise could admit. Silence stretched, filling the hall until even whispers sounded intrusive. A guest near the back lowered her phone, unable to reconcile the dignity before her with the cruelty inflicted upon it. Another whispered, "She's stronger than any of them know." Elise, sensing the unease, attempted to reassert control. "You think silence makes you powerful?" she sneered, laughter forced. "It only makes you invisible." But her words rang hollow. The more Elise pushed, the more the room began to shift, not outwardly, not yet, but in undercurrents that betrayed loyalty slipping. Guests glanced at one another, questioning the cruelty they had momentarily cheered. Some masked discomfort. With nervous laughter, others turned to their phones not to record, but to distract themselves from complicity. The marble floor reflected it all: the grandeur of wealth, the cruelty of arrogance, and the unshaken strength of a woman unwilling to bow. Amara's silence was not weakness. It was defiance carved into stillness. Wine stained her dress, yes, but it did not stain her resolve. She allowed herself to remain marked, knowing the stain would speak louder than Elise's theatrics ever could. Around them, waiters froze, their trays trembling slightly as they struggled to remain professional amid the spectacle. The quartet faltered for the briefest moment before recovering, the melody turning almost mournful. The chandelier above flickered, slightly, its glow casting shifting shadows across Elise's face, highlighting a smirk that faltered with each passing second. In that atmosphere, the stakes of the 2.4B contract began to whisper into focus. Guests who had celebrated its signing hours earlier now wondered about its fragility, about the weight one act of arrogance might carry. The silence between Amara and Elise was no longer personal. It was corporate, social, cultural. It was a silence layered with consequence. Elise, sensing her control thinning, raised her glass again, feigning nonchalance. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, laughter brittle. Yet no one joined her toast. The absence of response echoed louder than any cheer could have. Amara inhaled, exhaled, and lifted her chin. The wine continued its slow descent, marking her as much as it marked Elise's arrogance. The room watched, waiting, complicit yet transfixed. The silence promised something more, something waiting just beyond the moment, something inevitable. Ever felt judged unfairly? Share your story below. The room did not recover from the spill. Red still glistened against the navy fabric, catching chandelier light as if the dress itself had been dipped in fire. Amara Kingston stood still, her shoulders square, her expression unreadable, and yet every second of her silence pressed harder against the crowd than any words could. What was once laughter fading into whispers now returned, as Elise Warwick seized the stage she had created, determined not to let her cruelty collapse under its own weight. She raised her half-empty glass, high, crimson liquid swirling, and twirled, with a performer's flourish as though the ballroom was her theater. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice loud enough to cut through music, "let us toast to resilience, or the illusion of it." A ripple of uneasy chuckles floated across the hall. Some clapped nervously, others shifted in their seats, but the hesitation was visible. The cruelty had reached a height where amusement tangled with discomfort. Elise ignored hesitation, drinking in the attention with hunger, mistaking discomfort for admiration. She circled Amara, steps measured yet mocking, the silver silk of her gown catching the golden glow like armor polished for spectacle. "I almost admire you," she sneered, her eyes darting across the crowd for validation. "To stand here drenched in humiliation, pretending to be untouchable, it takes practice. Or maybe it just takes pretending you belong." A man near the back laughed louder than necessary, desperate to show allegiance to power. His voice echoed, but the laughter was hollow, brittle against the marble. Another guest captured the moment on video, angling her phone higher as if proximity to cruelty granted relevance. Yet not all eyes shared the same eagerness. Some froze, discomfort widening. In silence, as Elise's performance grew theatrical, a woman whispered to her husband, "This feels wrong," while another adjusted her pearl necklace nervously, eyes refusing to meet Amara's. The split widened. Those enthralled by Elise's arrogance leaned closer, while those unsettled stepped back, ashamed yet unwilling to intervene. Elise thrived on the divide. She gestured toward Amara with exaggerated flair, pointing her glass as though it were a scepter. "Tell us, Amara," she mocked. "What's the secret to surviving nights like these? Is it silence? Or is it knowing tomorrow's headlines? Will spell your stain louder than your name?" Gasps and chuckles overlapped. The quartet faltered mid-note before regaining rhythm, the music now trembling under tension. Waiters avoided the center of the hall, their trays carried like shields against the scene they could not disrupt. Amara remained unflinching, her chin slightly lifted, her hands relaxed at her sides. Each drop of wine that slipped from her dress to the floor struck with rhythm, a steady reminder of time passing, of composure tested yet unbroken. Her stillness was no longer just composure. It was defiance carved in silence, forcing the room to feel its own discomfort. The power of restraint unsettled Elise more than she would admit. She laughed again, louder, desperate, her voice rising with artificial brightness. "Oh, come now. Don't stand like a statue. Give us a show. After all, isn't that what you came for? To bask under chandeliers? To pretend this hall was yours?" Phones caught every word, their lenses unblinking witnesses. Social feeds lit in real time, hashtags forming quietly in the background, though the guests did not yet realize the reach of what they were capturing. Amara's gaze swept the hall, not at Elise, but at those who watched, her silence a mirror for their own choices. The more Elise ranted, the heavier that silence became, pressing into shoulders, curling into stomachs, forcing some to look away. One man lowered his phone, ashamed, muttering, "This isn't entertainment anymore." Elise heard only fragments, mistaking quiet for obedience. She spread her arms wide, wine sloshing dangerously. "Look at her!" she cried, spinning toward the audience. So still, so cold, as if silence equals strength. But silence, my friends, is emptiness dressed in courage, and emptiness cannot hold power. She expected cheers. Instead, she received scattered applause, thin and uneven. The hesitation sliced sharper than any boo. Her smile faltered before she steadied it again, doubling down. She turned back to Amara, stepping close enough for the scent of wine and perfume to hang heavy between them. "You think you scare me with that still face? You think markets care about silence? They care about names, about families, about history. You don't belong in ours." Her words cut, yet they also revealed desperation, the need to reclaim dominance slipping through her fingers. Amara's silence deepened, and in that silence, the crowd began to see Elise unravel. Every taunt felt less like power and more like panic disguised in theatrics. A guest whispered, "She's losing control," while another braver muttered, "And Amara hasn't said a word." The chandelier light caught Amara's stained dress, the wine reflecting crimson like battle scars etched into silk. Yet she stood regal, unshaken, as if the humiliation transformed into armor. Every guest saw it, even if not all admitted it. Elise raised her glass again, trying to reset control. "To power," she declared, voice sharp, "the kind you can't buy with signatures." She waited for cheers. The response came weak, murmured, reluctant. She downed the wine in frustration, eyes flashing toward Amara with a mixture of fury and fear. The silence following her toast felt endless, heavy enough to crack marble. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if they had witnessed the beginning of collapse rather than victory. Elise's smirk returned, though thinner now, cracks visible beneath the surface. She leaned forward, voice dropping low enough for nearby phones to capture, but loud enough for the hall to sense its edge. "You're nothing without our name. Remember that." The crowd inhaled collectively, as though awaiting Amara's reply. But no reply came. Instead, Amara lifted her chin higher, her eyes steady, her breath controlled. Silence thundered, and in that thunder, Elise's dominance fractured further. Guests shifted, the weight of complicity pressing heavier on their consciences. Some avoided her eyes, some filmed more cautiously, but all felt the shift. What was supposed to be humiliation was becoming a spectacle of arrogance crumbling against quiet strength. The music slowed, faltering under the strain, violins thin against tension. Wine continued dripping, its rhythm marking Amara's resilience. Elise stepped back, frustration clouding her poise, yet she forced another laugh. "See how she hides? Silence is not dignity, it's surrender dressed up pretty." But the hall no longer laughed freely. Laughter sounded brittle, cracked, insincere. A man coughed to mask unease. A woman glanced toward the exit, but no one intervened. No one spoke. Amara's silence chained them, holding the room hostage with dignity no one could shake. Elise's theatrics filled the air, but her power waned, and everyone knew it. What would you do in a moment of cruelty? Comment below. The hall felt different now, as though the air itself carried weight. Wine still clung to Amara Kingston's navy dress, soaking into seams, streaking down her arm, pooling onto marble that reflected crimson under the chandelier's golden glow. Each drop echoed like a drumbeat of patience, steady, unavoidable, unbroken. Her face, illuminated by fractured light, appeared both vulnerable and untouchable, a portrait of composure sculpted against cruelty. The music had softened to near silence, the quartet playing notes so faint they sounded like whispers floating through velvet curtains. Guests no longer laughed freely. Their nervous chuckles had faded into fragmented murmurs, words exchanged. Behind raised hands, eyes darting between Elise Warwick's restless theatrics and Amara's unshaken presence, Elise paced, the silver silk of her gown shimmering as though trying to blind the room with spectacle. She had thrived on attention for years, yet tonight that attention felt slippery, shifting away no matter how tightly she clutched it. She raised her voice again, desperate. "Do you all see? She refuses to fight back. Silence is weakness, not power." The proclamation rang hollow. Some guests nodded weakly, others shifted uncomfortably, but more than a few turned toward Amara, instead their gazes drawn to her stillness. The contrast between noise and calm grew sharper with every passing second. Amara's eyes lifted slowly, locking onto Elise's, and in that gaze, the room felt a tremor. She had not spoken, but her silence carried weight that Elise's words could not. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, a quiet challenge that made Elise's confident mask tremble for the briefest instant. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, not about spilled wine anymore, but about the contract signed that morning. $2.4 billion, someone murmured. Her company controls it. Another voice replied, and she hasn't said a word yet. Imagine if she did. The reminder struck like static across the room. This was not just spectacle, it was business, legacy, market stability. The stain on Amara's dress became symbolic, not of humiliation, but of consequences waiting to unfold. Elise sensed the whispers, her jaw tightening. She laughed too loudly, raising her glass again, though it was nearly empty. "Don't fool yourselves," she cried. "Deals are ink on paper, family is power, heritage is unshakable." Yet her words faltered, breaking against the murmurs that grew louder beneath her performance. For the first time, she felt control, slipping not because of Amara's words, but because of her lack of them. Every attempt at mockery fell into silence that answered louder than applause ever could. Amara shifted slightly, enough for light to strike across her wine-streaked cheek. The chandelier caught the crimson against her skin, painting her not as a victim, but as a figure transformed. Her silence became something sacred, a refusal to bow that unsettled even those who had laughed earlier. Elise turned sharply, scanning the room for loyalty. Some guests looked away, others sipped nervously, and a few clutched their phones as though afraid to be seen recording. What had begun as entertainment was unraveling into revelation, arrogance exposed, dignity magnified. Elise stepped closer, her voice tightening. "Don't look at her like that. She's no queen. She's just another executive who thinks contracts make her royalty." The attempt fell flat. Guests heard the crack in her tone, the urgency beneath bravado. Amara did not blink. She lifted her chin a fraction higher, letting the silence expand until even the quartet's faint music seemed intrusive. Each guest felt it differently, some as awe, some as shame, others as admiration, yet all felt it. Power had shifted quietly, undeniably. A man whispered, "She's not even speaking, but she owns this room." Another replied, "That's what terrifies." "Elise!" Elise's smirk faltered under the gaze of an audience no longer fully hers. She turned back to Amara, trying once more to pierce the armor of silence. "Say something," she demanded, voice sharp. "Defend yourself. Or will you just stand there, mute, hiding behind contracts and silence?" Amara did not speak. Instead, she took one step forward, the soft click of her heel echoing across marble, louder than Elise's outburst. That single step drew every eye, turned every head, silenced every murmur. The weight of composure pressed harder than noise. Elise flinched, almost imperceptibly, but enough for those watching closely to notice. It was no longer Elise circling. Amara. It was Amara's silence circling Elise, stripping her arrogance bare. The whispers shifted again, faster now, fueled by phones lighting up with quiet alerts, messages traded discreetly. "If she pulls the contract," one murmured. Another cut in, "Markets will shatter." Guests began imagining consequences, their allegiance tilting toward the woman whose silence held more threat than any shout. Amara's gaze swept once more across the hall, pausing on no one, yet reaching everyone. Her silence spoke of patience, of dignity, of unshakable control. Every guest understood. She was not humiliated. She was choosing silence, choosing restraint. And choice itself is power. Elise's performance weakened. Her laugh cracked, brittle, unconvincing. She raised her hand as if to command the crowd, but no one responded with the same eagerness as before. Some clapped politely, others remained frozen. The energy had shifted entirely. Elise turned back, frustration plain now. "This is nothing but a stain," she snapped, gesturing toward the crimson marks. "Fabric ruined, that's all. Nothing more." Yet every eye saw differently. The wine had become emblematic, no longer humiliation, but symbol, a banner of dignity held under fire. Amara's silence made the stain beautiful, her strength undeniable. The chandelier light glowed against her face, gilding wine-streaked skin in radiance that Elise could not diminish. The balance had tilted. Everyone knew it. Even Elise. She faltered, her words catching in her throat, her poise cracking just enough for whispers to spread faster. "Did you see that?" one guest murmured. "She's rattled." The hall vibrated with tension, a collective realization hanging heavy. Elise's cruelty had lost its bite. It was no longer Amara who appeared diminished. It was Elise, desperate and exposed. Amara breathed steadily, her silence transforming from endurance into dominance. Elise raised her voice again, almost shouting, "You're nothing without us." Nothing. But the words sounded desperate, echoes against marble rather than commands. Guests saw it clearly now. Elise's power depended on noise. Amara's thrived in silence. The tables had turned, invisibly yet irrevocably. The orchestra stopped entirely, bows resting against strings, as though even music acknowledged the shift. For one breathtaking moment, the ballroom was silent except for the soft drip of wine against stone, each drop punctuating Elise's unraveling, and Amara's rise. The audience leaned forward, waiting, breath held, sensing that the balance of the night had changed forever. Elise's silver gown shimmered still, but the glow no longer dazzled. Amara's wine-streaked navy, once symbol of humiliation, now stood regal, her figure commanding without a word. Whispers of the deal spread faster now, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. $2.4 billion, someone said again, firmer this time. She holds it, the knowledge layered over the scene. Every guest now measuring Elise's arrogance against tangible stakes. Humiliation had turned to threat, not toward Amara, but toward Elise's own family, her empire, her legacy. Amara's eyes remained fixed, unbroken. Silence was no longer a defense. It was a blade sharpened by restraint, and Elise, for all her noise, bled authority with each passing second. Ever seen someone rise above humiliation? Share below. The ballroom pulsed with tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. The chandelier light glimmered across crimson streaks, still clinging to Amara Kingston's navy dress. Each drop hardened into a badge of endurance. Silence stretched, like a wire, taut and dangerous. Elise Warwick, once the center of attention, fidgeted with her empty glass, her laughter a brittle echo swallowed by marble. Guests felt the shift, the invisible balance tipping fully. Phones hovered, recording. Every second, lenses capturing the quiet power rising from a woman who had not spoken yet had already altered the atmosphere. Amara inhaled. A slow, measured breath that steadied the room more than any command. She reached into her clutch with a deliberate grace, pulling free a sleek phone that reflected chandelier light in cold silver. The movement was simple, but, in silence, it thundered. Conversation stilled entirely. Forks froze mid-air. Even the quartet lowered their bows. The only sound was the faint hum of air conditioning brushing velvet curtains. Elise forced a laugh, but the sound cracked. "Really? You think silence and a phone can save you?" she sneered, voice sharper than intended, betraying nerves. Amara ignored her, unlocking the device with a calm swipe, her eyes unblinking. The glow of the screen lit her face, highlighting wine stains like war paint. She scrolled briefly, pressed, a single contact, then lifted the phone to her ear. The ring cut through the room like a drumbeat, steady and unyielding. 1, 2, 3 tones, each stretching longer than the last, until a voice answered. "This is Kingston," Amara said softly, her tone even but resonant enough to ripple through silence. "Terminate the contract, effective immediately." Gasps burst across the hall. Guests clutched their glasses, stunned, eyes wide as though they had witnessed history break in real time. Elise blinked rapidly, her practiced smile collapsing into disbelief. "You wouldn't," she snapped, voice trembling. "You can't." Amara's expression remained calm, her gaze fixed forward, her voice steady into the phone. "Pull all agreements. Notify legal. Release the statement within the hour." Each phrase was clear, sharp, cutting. The room absorbed every syllable. Elise staggered back a step, her silver gown catching light as though mocking her faltering confidence. She looked around for support, but guests avoided her eyes, their attention locked on Amara, whose authority eclipsed every shimmer of arrogance. Phones captured it all, screens glowing brighter, fingers trembling to keep recording the woman dismantling a billion-dollar empire with a single call. The voice on the other end confirmed. "Understood, Miss Kingston. Consider it done." Amara lowered the phone slowly, her posture unwavering, her chin lifted. She ended the call without flourish, slipping the device back into her clutch with quiet finality. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Elise's confidence shattered visibly, her hands tightening around the stem of her empty glass until it nearly snapped. She forced words through a tightening throat. "Do you realize what you've just done? Billions, billions, gone in a moment." But the outrage rang hollow. Guests no longer looked at her with admiration. They looked at Amara, their faces, reflecting awe, shock, and even respect. One guest whispered to another, "She actually did it." Another murmured, "Markets will explode in minutes." The weight of consequence crashed into the room. Notifications buzzed on a few phones. Subtle at first, then louder as alerts from financial feeds trickled through. Stocks tied to the deal began flashing red, updates appearing mid-gala, markets shifting before dessert could be served. The noise of alerts merged with the silence, a strange harmony of chaos and awe. Amara remained motionless, her face serene, her body marked by wine, yet untouchable. Elise shook her head furiously, silver earrings swaying. "You've doomed yourself. You think breaking this deal makes you powerful. It makes you reckless." But her words found no audience. Guests were too busy absorbing the gravity of what they had witnessed. One woman, humiliated publicly, reclaiming power with a single, deliberate choice. Elise's arrogance looked smaller now, dwarfed by the consequence she could not control. A man in a tailored suit whispered to his companion, "This moment will be studied. Boardrooms will talk about it for decades." Another replied, "And it all happened under chandeliers and violins." Phones remained raised, recording angles. From every corner, documenting not Elise's cruelty, but Amara's composure, her authority, her decisive strike. Hashtags spread quietly in digital spaces beyond the marble walls. The image of a woman in a wine-streaked dress, phone still glowing faintly, became more than a scene. It became a symbol. Elise stumbled, her voice breaking. "You can't erase us. We are Warwick. Our name is carved into this city." Amara finally turned her head, her gaze settling on Elise for the first time since the call. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. She said nothing, yet the look alone dismantled Elise further. The crowd, once entertained by mockery, now watched with reverence, their respect shifting entirely. Even the chandelier seemed to cast its light differently, illuminating Amara's stained figure like a painting etched in gold and crimson. The contrast was complete. Elise noisy, frantic, unraveling. Amara silent, deliberate, unshakable. Guests exchanged glances, their loyalty rearranged. The man who had laughed earlier at Elise's taunts now looked down, ashamed. The woman who had whispered doubts now whispered to her friend, "This is what true power looks like." Elise tried one final time, desperation spilling. "She ruined everything. For all of us. Do you not see?" Yet the crowd did not rally. Their silence condemned her, while their gazes uplifted Amara. The shift was permanent, irreversible. Financial alerts buzzed louder, news spreading beyond velvet walls, headlines already forming across global feeds. What had begun as a gala celebration had now transformed into an unforgettable reckoning. Amara adjusted her stance slightly, wine dripping one last time against marble, marking the floor with red. She did not need to speak. The room knew. The city would know. The world would know. Have you seen a single choice change everything? Tell us below. Phones vibrated first, small tremors in jeweled clutches and inside tuxedo pockets. Then a chorus of tones rolled across the chandeliered hall as alerts spilled onto screens. A news banner flashed on one guest's device, then 5. then nearly. Every handheld device displayed a rectangle pulsing the same blunt message. The contract was gone and markets were answering. The Chicago ballroom, minutes earlier a gallery of polished laughter, reassembled itself into a hushed command center of whispers, swipes, and widening eyes. The marble underfoot returned crisp echoes from hurried steps as guests drifted toward. Corners to read updates, while the gilded wall sconces threw steady light onto faces turning pale. Amara Kingston remained near the orchids exactly where humiliation had attempted its stage, her navy dress still streaked with wine, the stains drying into a pattern that looked deliberate, almost ceremonial. Elise Warwick stood several paces away, silver silk shimmering without warmth, fingers flexing around an empty stem as though gripping proof of a power that no longer obeyed. Another wave of alerts pinged in staccato bursts. A broker in a midnight. Jacket whispered to a colleague, line graph lifted between them, a red cascade stepping downward, each candle a verdict. A woman from a tech fund muttered that Warwick's options had been halted for volatility, and someone else swore softly that analysts were already drafting notes about leadership risk. The quartet, sensing the mood's collapse, set instruments aside. One violinist pinched the bridge of his nose while the cellist studied the floor as if the stone might offer a script. Candles flickered in crystal cylinders along the aisle, their flames steady despite the ambient shock, sending slim columns of warmth past the scent of lilies and wine. Voices lowered, diction grew careful. The soundscape replaced music with the tap-tap of thumbs and the thin hiss of breath through teeth. A server eased by with a tray of gujeres nobody touched. Amara's posture did not alter. She seemed carved from resolve, chin lifted, shoulders level, gaze neither pleading nor boasting. The wine darkened in irregular patches across the navy, fabric, drawing delicate rivers that had dried into edges, a map of insult rewritten into testimony. Someone whispered that a cable channel had cut into coverage with a breaking segment. An older press liaison in a slate tie retreated toward the entry alcove, already fielding calls with the flattened tone of damage control. By the bar, 3. Executives who had laughed earlier now argued in tight circles about contingency plans, their laughter replaced by the granular language of risk. Elise tried to locate a friendly face and found fewer than she expected. Her smile reappeared in fragments, then faded when no one mirrored it. She lifted her glass again, realized it was empty, and set it down too quickly so that the crystal clicked against the marble with a sharp, telling ring. Overreaction, she said to no one in particular, aiming the word at the room. The market likes drama. It will correct. Even her diction sounded thinner. A man with a salt streak in his beard watched her with clinical distance and typed a note to his board. The chandeliers did not blink. Their prisms kept scattering gold across linen and stone, while Chicago winter air threaded through the nearby vestibule each time doors opened for late arrivals who paused, read a headline, and stopped, moving. A young associate approached Elise with a cautious bend at the shoulder. Ms. Warwick, there are reporters outside. She waved the warning away, then hesitated, realizing that cameras would find wine streaks on Amara and questions in her own pupils. She demanded a phone. The associate handed one over with visible reluctance. Elise glanced at the notifications, saw the numbers, then pushed the device back as if it had burned. Across the room, a director from Kingston Dynamics received a short message confirming filings were underway. He exhaled and studied Amara the way sailors watch an anchored lighthouse after a storm changes course. Her immobility steadied people, who had forgotten how to stand. The orchids near her shoulder held droplets of condensation, each bead rounding the petal's edge, then falling soundlessly, a counterpoint to the faint drip the dress had surrendered earlier. A photographer, invited to capture joy, reconsidered his assignment and lowered his camera, unwilling to reduce the moment to anything other than witness. The city beyond the windows pulsed with lake wind and traffic, a wash of sirens in the distance that might have been unrelated, yet felt synchronized with the news running through the hall. A doorman slipped inside to ask the event manager whether additional security was needed. The manager shook her head, then looked toward Elise as if expecting another scene, then toward Amara as if measuring gravity. Conversation gathered around. Microclimates. A cluster near the orchestra pit spoke softly about covenant clauses, termination penalties, and insurance. At a table under the third chandelier, two alumni from a business school debated whether any board could have saved a partnership. Tested in public like this. Near the dessert station, a younger crowd scrolled through feeds where the first clips already trended. A red arc through light, a still figure refusing to bow, a phone lifted with the steadiness of a gavel. The captions did not howl, they measured. Words like consequence, dignity, and line crossed repeated across timelines normally addicted to euphemism. Elise's circle thinned further. A cousin pretended to take a call and walked toward the corridor. An investor murmured that her family should release a statement by morning, then added that morning might be too late. A legal advisor recommended stepping outside. She declined and pressed her shoulders back as though posture alone could rebuild a dynasty. Yet posture cannot rewrite a ledger. The room's allegiance had drifted. Eyes returned to Amara, not with pity, but with a respect sharpened by realism. The wine-streaked navy carried its own authority, a stark contrast against gold and crystal, turning insult into emblem. Where earlier whispers had tasted of schadenfreude, the new whispers felt like memory taking notes. A partner from a European fund approached with careful gravity and offered a linen square. Amara took it, dabbed once at her wrist, folded the cloth, and returned it with a nod that landed like a signature. No apology was passed between them because none was required. A draft of cold air slid in from the vestibule again, lifting the hem of a nearby tablecloth so that candlelight flickered across etched glass. The movement reminded the room of the city outside, elevated tracks grinding, gulls calling over the lake, streetlights cutting aisles through steam. Chicago kept breathing while fortunes recalculated. Elise tried humor, the old solvent for tension. "Everyone loves a dramatic exit," she announced, expecting a chuckle. None came. Her words hovered, then fell without echo. She pivoted toward Amara. "This isn't over," she added, reaching for force and grabbing air. Amara did not answer. A reporter's message slid across a nearby screen with the headline reformatted in bold. Beneath it, a running ticker named Companies Pivoting Strategies Overnight. A banker spoke quietly about counterparty exposure, while the room calmly steadied around Amara's unbroken, silent center. Elise moved first, silver gown flashing as she crossed the marble, chin high, perfume sharp enough to announce intention before words tried. "Look at me," she said, cutting through the thinning chatter and the restless hum of phones. "Remember what moves this city. My family funds hospitals, anchors museums, underwrites nights like this, and steadies campaigns when winds change. Banks take our calls. Boards ask our advice. Permits are clear because people understand stability. You think one phone call erases that?" She let a smile harden. "We are Warwick. We outlast noise." A few heads nodded from habit, then stilled. When eyes returned to Amara Kingston standing beneath chandelier light with wine dried along navy fabric in dark, deliberate strokes, Elise pivoted toward the crowd, arm lifted as if addressing shareholders. "You can cancel signatures," she said, "but not blood, not lineage, not a name that built steel and glass out of Lake Michigan wind." She paused, voice softening into cruelty. "You were invited to enjoy the view, not redraw the skyline." Amara did not blink. She studied Elise the way a conservator studies paint, noting the hairline fractures beneath the polish. Phones tilted, small galaxies of screens catching prisms. Elise stepped closer. "You'll be shut out," she warned. "Investors drift. Vendors hesitate. People work with us because we make problems vanish. We call, and things resolve. That's power. Tonight could have crowned you, and you set the crown on fire. She laughed brightly. Wrong. Who stands beside you at the next negotiation? News moved in ripples that never reached Elise, whose focus clung to the woman who refused to bend. She gestured toward the stain. That dress tells the truth, she said. You dressed for a seat, and the room reminded you whose table it is. Amara lifted her chin a fraction. The chandelier threw warm facets across her cheek, gilding the red along her jaw. When she spoke, the words arrived measured, low, complete. Power isn't poured from a glass, she said. It's earned in silence. The sentence moved like a current. It ran into screens, into shoulders, into breath that had been held too long. Elise blinked, steadied, and forced poise. Pretty line, she said. Systems don't change because someone delivers a quote. They change with leverage, and we have more than anyone here. Legacy relationships you cannot see. Protections you cannot break. Tomorrow, every publication will want our version, and they will get it. Narratives are commodities. Consequences are not, Amara replied. She left the rest unsaid. The words planted themselves and did not move. Elise looked for confirmation and found the slow drift of loyalty. A cousin stepped backward. Donor adjusted his cuff and inspected the floor. A corporate officer the family had lifted into 3 seats turned away to answer a compliance note. No theatrics, only rebalancing, like buildings when the lake wind shifts from south to east. Amara took 1 step into full light. Dried wine glowed like maroon glass, an accidental sash. Air tightened. She did not raise her voice. Names are remembered for how they treat people when cameras watch and when they don't. Elise flushed. We keep payrolls paid, endowments safe, opera houses open, she rattled. We do more good with a month of interest than most see in 10 years. And you throw away prosperity to make a point. Not a point, Amara said. A standard. Phones caught the exchange, but the recording could not hold the room's new tilt toward accountability. The chandeliers hummed with current. A draft pushed along the floor and made candle flames bow. Outside, a siren moved past and faded, a straight line that underlined how time had already moved from insult to ledger. Elise tried again, softer, spectacle giving way to persuasion. You and I aren't so different, she said. We know the cost of winning. You climb a mountain like this, you learn to look down. You also learn when to lift others. That's stewardship. That's why people trust us. Amara held her gaze. Trust is not an inheritance. The answer struck clean, metallic. Even the ambitious paused as if a vote had been called and the math had changed. Elise searched for an angle and found only a warning. Last chance, she said quietly. Call them back. Say emotions ran hot. We revisit terms. We salvage optics. We win together. Winning together would require losing something I will not trade, Amara said. Dignity is not collateral. The room finally made a sound. Not applause, not gasps, but the hush that precedes a verdict. Elise gathered the last of her certainty like a shawl. You think you own this moment, she said louder. Stories move on. People forget. Donations return. Rooms refill. We will reframe tonight by morning. Forgetting isn't healing, Amara answered. Rooms filled by fear empty just as fast. A murmur rolled along the wall and died. The event manager checked the time. A director from a pension fund typed a note to a colleague. She will be difficult to oppose. 4 plain words, heavy as any keynote. Elise tried dominance one last time. Do you want an apology? She asked, arms opening as if offering a stage. Fine. I'm sorry the wine was red. I'm sorry your fabric is stained. I'm sorry you believe paper could become pedigree. If you want me on my knees, understand that our world does not kneel." Amara did not blink. "I didn't ask for an apology," she said. "I asked nothing. I answered everything." She let the meaning rest, then stepped forward and closed the final inch between spectacle and standard. Up close, her tone thinned, to boardroom quiet, the kind spoken off mic and still permanent. "Understand this," she said. "I have no interest in your fall. I care about the floor. Raise it and stand." The line did not stab. It lifted and set down. Because it offered a way forward rather than a demand for ruin, it disarmed even those inclined to resist. Elise's shoulders sagged almost invisibly as if scaffolding had slipped. Her eyes flicked to cousin, donor, and officer and found no anchor willing to be seen. Respect moved through the crowd like a tide. 3 people who had kept filming lowered their phones by instinct, then raised them again not to hunt scandal, but to archive composure. A woman who had flinched during the spill now stood straighter, an unspoken thank you crossing the distance. Several guests set their glasses down, breathing even, choosing attention over gossip in a quiet collective correction. Elise steadied, smoothed a seam, and restored her smile, but the gloss no longer convinced. "We will rebuild," she said, mostly to herself. "We always do." Amara inclined her head without victory lap or disdain. "Then build better." The confrontation ended without a shove or a shout, only a recalibration. Allegiance settled, where conduct had pointed. Phones kept recording, but what they captured now was not a fall or a triumph screamed from crystal steps. It was a woman holding posture, another absorbing what posture demands, and a city that would speak of both. By morning, when lake wind cleared the glass and the skyline kept its shape while names relearned what truly supports it. Amara rose without haste, chair legs whispering over marble, as if they understood this wasn't a moment for noise. Wine drifted from her collar to the hem, a crimson path catching prismatic light from the chandeliers. She didn't dab or flinch. She aligned her shoulders, set her jaw, and let stillness declare command. The quartet softened into air, servers halted mid-step, and phones hovered like cautious satellites. Elise Warwick stood within arm's reach, a grin losing voltage, bangles, chiming against a glass that suddenly felt childish. She shaped Amara's name with sugar and regret, then swallowed the performance when the crowd withheld laughter. Amara placed her napkin on the table, squared it, and turned toward the aisle that hadn't existed until bodies moved. It opened for her the way lake ice parts for a ship, reluctantly at first, then with certainty. She walked, heels meeting stone in even notes that traveled farther than anyone's whisper. The scent of oak and blackberry rose from the stain, mixing with lilies, waxed wood, and chilled champagne. A designer lowered her gaze. A senator's aide tucked his phone away as if contraband. Attention didn't follow Amara. It obeyed her. Elise tried again to summon control and found only air. She looked for allies, discovered indifference, and stepped back. Portrait perfect and powerless. Amara's glance brushed her like weather. Acknowledged, not engaged. Near the foyer, a mirrored wall created a corridor of smaller versions, each reflecting navy cloth threaded with red, each sending a clear message deeper into the building's memory. The pianist stitched spare chords that honored the hush. Through tall windows, Chicago gleamed, Willis Tower pricking the clouds, the river winding between facades, rain holding its breath. Amara reached the grand stair and paused to catch her breath. Drops formed at the hem and fell to stone in neat dark coins. The staff would leave until morning. She descended without looking down, palm grazing the rail only to satisfy tradition. The staircase offered her like punctuation at the end of a precise sentence. On the mezzanine, a couple ended a disagreement mid-syllable and stepped aside. A junior analyst sealed his camera roll and memorized the posture that would inform his career. Behind her, the room absorbed the shift. Cruelty had burned bright, consequence now illuminated. Elise retreated without announcing it. She edged toward a service corridor perfumed with citrus cleaner, heels tapping too fast for composure. A final glance over her shoulder reached for dominance and found history instead. Downstairs, the vestibule exhaled cool air around Amara, like the first seconds beside a lake at dusk. The doorman adjusted his jacket, ceremony replacing routine. He opened one heavy door, then the next, folding city sound into the hall. Taxis, an L-train's hum, a street drummer's cadence, clipped conversations about markets traveling across Bluetooth. The sidewalk mirrored chandelier halos, a watery echo of the evening. A black sedan idled at the curb, driver attentive, cap level. He reached for the handle. Amara lifted her palm and asked for a moment. She turned to the glass doors. The hall held its breath between apology and awe. Nothing moved yet. Inside, faces gathered behind them like portraits, luminous, stunned, unguarded. She breathed roasted nuts from a cart, diesel, and whetstone, the honest perfume of Chicago. The decision upstairs kept rippling through pockets. She let it. Inside, the host attempted a small revival, then surrendered to the reality of a night that had changed shape. The florist inspected towering arrangements and moved nothing. Architecture, not staff, adjusted, stretching to fit the truth. Amara remained near the threshold to give witnesses a final frame. She met a young employee's anxious eyes and offered a nod that would fuel years. She accepted a silent hand over heart from an elder and treated it as an exchange rather than a tribute. Then she stepped onto the wet concrete and let the night take custody of the moment. A streetlight burned inside a halo of mist. Tires hissed. The driver opened the door again. Before entering, Amara studied the facade. Carved faces, leaves, shields, stone that had watched triumph and scandal pass over the same steps. Buildings, remember. She wanted this one to keep the record clean. No shouting, no vengeance, only a line, drawn with perfect calm. She touched the car's edge, felt cool metal through damp cloth, and released her hand. She entered, and the door softly shut. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Wacker and LaSalle," she said, voice level. "Not home, not the office. Water." The sedan eased from the curb. Through the window, the hall glowed like a lantern. People gathered in low voices, and screens dimmed. Rain thickened into a steady patter. As the vehicle glided along the river, lights printed moving constellations across the glass. Amara watched them break and reform at every intersection. She thought of her team and the Monday ahead when narratives would reduce, and headlines would try to crown villains and heroes. The record lived in actions, not captions. The stain would dry by then, edges darker, center lighter, an accidental map of consequence. Chicago carried on, choosing pragmatism over drama. A cyclist flashed past, raincoat snapping like a small flag. A barge shifted under a bridge with the steady patience of work. Amara leaned back, spine aligned, shoulders unlocked. The wine's perfume faded to a memory. At the intersection, she asked the driver to stop by a balustrade where the river braided neon into threads. She stepped out and stood bare to the rain, letting droplets blend with the earlier spill. Across the water, half the lamps remained, on for those who work late and those who write alone. She silenced her phone. Proof could take care of itself. What mattered was allowing consequence to breathe without witness or rush. The driver waited, patience untested. Amara rested her hands on the railing and felt the city through metal, a pulse steadier than any market notification. She granted the night one clear private sentence, unspoken, exact, and returned to the car. The door closed. The engine engaged. The sedan moved forward. Behind them, the hotel resumed its ceremony of lights. Inside, conversations rearranged themselves around reality. Elise occupied a quieter corner of those stories now, a caution rather than a star. The crowd would recall how a room that had mocked learned a lesson without a speech, how recordings caught more than spectacle, how quiet ate the oxygen that arrogance needed. Upstairs, the staff would leave the dark coins on stone until morning, and then, with steady hands, clean around the edges as if preserving an outline. By tomorrow, headlines would reach across cities. Some would call Amara ruthless, others would call her necessary. She would accept neither label because labels compete with work. She would meet her team, review the next slate of moves, and continue. In the car's muted cabin, she let her breath match the wipers. Dignity does not erase what happened. It frames it so the truth can stand. She looked out at the river, alive under rain, and let stillness finish what the room had started. She didn't plan a statement. She didn't rehearse a line. She allowed the route to carry her toward the next hour, wine still drying, power intact, exit complete. A minute after the sedan pulled from the awning, a notification reached every phone in the ballroom, a live statement from Amara Kingston. Under the chandelier's soft dusk, guests lifted their screens, sound rising in a single clear channel. Amara sat in the back seat with city lights sliding past her window like slow constellations. She looked into the camera without ornament, wine still drying along the navy fabric, and spoke with the clarity of someone who would not sell certainty for applause. "Tonight was a test," she said. "Not of revenue, not of hype. A test of the standard. You saw a choice." She paused long enough for that word to root. "Dignity is not a costume I take off when rooms turn bright. It is the floor I stand on. When that floor is attacked, the choice is simple. You protect it, or you teach a generation to step aside when arrogance flexes. I will not teach surrender." Her voice did not climb. "Consequences are not cruelty. They are doors. Walking through them, you learn. Ignore them, you repeat harm until harm feels like culture. Tonight, consequence arrived on schedule." In the hall, glass stems stopped moving. "To those who poured, laughed, or filmed," Amara continued, "I am not asking for an apology. I am inviting repair. Repair begins with conduct, not captions. It begins when power stops assuming immunity and starts practicing care even when nobody can clap." The camera caught a rim of city steam crossing a traffic light. Her gaze did not waver. "Some will say this was reckless, that I let emotion drive a ledger. Emotion did not touch the contract. Principle did. I would rather lose favorable headlines than lose the lesson young professionals need when they face rooms trained to belittle them. If I am remembered for anything tonight, let it be for drawing a line you can trust." She breathed once, slowly. "To the people who work late and prepare perfectly and still get treated like furniture, you are not furniture. You are the architecture. Keep your standards high, your receipts clean, your hands steady. Do not explain your worth to those who measure belonging by surname." A murmur like wind passed through the crowd, not argument, recognition. "To leaders watching," she said, "clarity is not cruelty. Protect your teams in public. Correct yourself in private. Pay on time. Tell the truth. When partners cross lines, stop the music. You do not need a stage to enforce values. You need a spine." The stain on her shoulder caught Amber and glowed like a small banner. "I am grateful for the people who steadied this outcome without noise," she said. "The lawyers who moved fast, the staff who kept calm, the guests who chose discretion over spectacle. Strength is contagious. So is contempt. Choose the one that builds." She did not mention names. She did not cause harm. She named the standard and left space for listeners to stand beside it. "What happens next?" she asked aloud, answering herself. "We rebuild with partners who value respect more than rooms applaud. We hire, mentor, deliver, and let performance write the longest sentence in this story." In the ballroom, the air felt newly oxygenated, as if the speech had opened a window nobody had noticed. Eyes shone without embarrassment, backs straightened. Elise's cluster stood near the orchids, stunned into quiet that refused performance. Amara closed with 12 words, spaced like steady footsteps. "Power isn't poured from a glass. It's earned in silence together." The shot held. Then, the stream ended. Silence lasted another full measure before the hall remembered sound. Someone exhaled audibly. A glass touched linen without a clink. The event manager lowered her radio and placed it on a chair. A banker tucked his phone away and looked toward the door Amara had used, as if distance could condense. A violinist whispered, "That will outlive tonight," and the cellist nodded without breaking the quiet. Outside, sirens braided with the L's iron rhythm. Inside, awe settled like dust that gleamed. Guests exchanged a few words because summary felt cheap beside clarity. Screens stopped recording, then started again as people captured the room itself. The faces made attentive, the chandeliers reflecting soft halos, the orchids still holding water on their petals. The symbol had become ritual. Elise attempted a smile and let it fail. The publicist drafted lines that already sounded obsolete. Two donors shook her hand, polite, detached. She thanked them with practiced warmth that refused to warm. The door to the corridor closed behind a cousin who did not return. The hall had chosen its legacy, and it was not glitter. It was a sentence spoken without volume that rearranged posture. From the service entry, a young employee paused with a folded tablecloth, phone tucked beneath his forearm, eyes wet and steady. He whispered, "Thank you," to no one specific, and continued working with a pace that looked like pride. Near. The bar, a guest who had recorded the humiliation earlier, deleted that clip, then saved the statement twice, as though archiving dignity could compensate for a lapse. A drifting breeze from the vestibule lifted a program and set it down again. The chandelier above the center aisle hummed faintly. Candles drew narrow flames. The floor, polished mirror, held the whole evening without judgment. The spill, the stare, the call, the consequence, the standard, the words. A final wave of notifications arrived. Networks stitching the speech into headlines, transcripts spreading, subtitled versions crossing continents within minutes. In those frames, Chicago looked like a city that knows endurance. Bridge steel, dark against the river, frost on railings, a skyline that makes promises and keeps them. The hall accepted its part in that story and quieted further, almost reverent. People began to leave in small groups, not eager to escape, only done with the noise. Some stopped at the doorway and looked back at the chandelier one last time. Others walked to the lobby and stood still before stepping into cabs, as if their feet needed to translate respect before moving. Later, long after candles were snuffed and linens collected, the staff would say the goodbye felt different. Not smaller, just cleaner. Managers would gather the last glasses and find fewer fingerprints than usual, as if hands had learned restraint. The city would keep humming, but a sentence would keep humming with it. This is the moment where you, watching from another city, another shift, another screen, choose what to carry forward. Carry the spectacle, and the next room repeats tonight's first act. Carry standards, and the next room repeats the last. If you've ever been told to swallow disrespect for access, know this. Access without respect is a lock without a door. You are allowed to walk away and build the door. The camera did not return, yet the invitation remained. Phones held the clip, but memory held the meaning. The point was never the stain. The point was the floor, Keep it strong. Teach others to stand on it. When you lead, do it in a way that leaves people taller. When you follow, choose leaders who keep promises when eyes are not watching. When you partner, demand gravity, not glitter. And now, a request to those who believe conduct should win over cruelty. Be loud in sharing standards, be consistent in practice, and be generous in credit. Speak up at tables, back the person who stands alone, and refuse to reward mockery dressed as sophistication. Do not wait for a stage. The work is wherever you are. If you stand for dignity over cruelty, like, subscribe, and share your city below. Join us for stories that change the game. Bring a friend, bring a team, bring your voice. The room is bigger than it looks, and there is space for every person who chooses a higher floor and steadier hands. Stand tall, protect your floor, and build forward.